My name is Chris Hukins. I'm a professor at George Washington University Law School. Welcome to our webinar series organized by the George Washington University Law School Government Procurement Law Program and the Open Contracting Partnership. Thank you very much for joining us for this and for our future sessions. You see here on the screen, you see a description of the webinar series that will unfold over the next few weeks. In this series, we'll examine how countries have implemented the principles of open contracting to turn public procurement into a data-driven, user-friendly digital public service. You'll learn how open contracting at its core involves two key principles: making sure all procurement data is accessible and making sure that that data is machine readable so that it can be used effectively for data exchange and analysis. At the end of our last session, the one that has to do with Africa and Europe, we'll be having a special additional session from the with an official from the European Commission and European experts to talk about how data exchange is occurring in Europe and the European Union using open standards. From our speakers around the world, you'll learn firsthand how open contracting drives accountability, competition, innovation, and sustainability in public procurement. Over the next three sessions, we'll share how to translate legislation into action, engage stakeholders across government, business, and civil society to collaborate on reforms, to ensure procurement data is actionable by making it machine readable and fully publicly available, and present tools and approaches that drive systematic change. Today, we'll give you a brief overview of why public procurement matters and how open contracting can transform government spending so it can better serve people and communities. With that, I'd like to introduce Jessica Tillipman. Jessica Tillipman is the Associate Dean who leads our Government Procurement Law program at GW Law School. She's a graduate of our law school, and she regularly teaches, writes, and lectures on emerging issues in anti-corruption and public procurement in the United States and around the world. She's a recognized leader in our field who is regularly quoted in the press and has testified several times before Congress on issues of anti-corruption and procurement. We're delighted she could join us to help kick off this important webinar series. Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to you and OCP for organizing this incredible global series. So I'm delighted to be here the first day, kicking off the first part of this series. I've been asked to just do a brief introduction, and I want to just start at a most basic level, which is why does public procurement matter today? As we all know, public procurement plays a critical role in people's lives, whether it's infrastructure or healthcare or national security or disaster relief. It shapes the world around us. And the decisions regarding not only how, but what we buy can drive meaningful change, whether it's environmental responsibility, economic growth, or even market access. And there's huge money at stake. In the United States, in fiscal year 2024, we spent $755 billion on public procurement. At the state and local level in the United States, we spend $7 trillion annually, and globally, it's roughly 12% of GDP spent on public procurement. And open contracting plays a key role in this. When that much money is being spent, we need transparency to ensure that there's accountability, competition, trust, and especially as contracts grow in size, we need this accountability even more. And understanding why procurement matters, particularly today in 2025, means understanding how it's changing. And nothing is reshaping, in my opinion, government procurement more profoundly than artificial intelligence. Governments are now procuring systems that don't just automate. They learn, they adapt, they influence public policy, and with that automation increases integrity risks. Sometimes I hear people saying things like, AI is just a normal IT, another IT contract. It's not just another normal IT purchase. Models learn and they adapt, they drift, they hallucinate, they rely on significantly large data sets, which may have ownership issues or legal or financial implications or exploitation or security implications. And as we see governments increasingly not only buying it to use in its operations, but also using AI to help procure things, we have to understand that there are existing gaps in our frameworks today. For example, one of the biggest is oversight capacity. We have a significantly underprepared acquisition workforce across the globe who's not ready to deal with and understand how these very impressive and sophisticated machines drift or can have bias or have unique IP and cybersecurity risks. They may have some understanding sometimes on the outset of how to buy it, but they're not having the full capacity to deal with the life cycle risks associated with the procurement and use of AI. Many governments around the world have very fragmented IP and data rights strategies. I like to look at it as I call the Goldilocks approach. On one hand, we have individuals pushing for very significant restrictions in order to protect and guard against the misuse of data or vendor lock-in. And on the other hand, we have the Wild West approach, where folks think anything that would result in restrictions would inhibit people from entering a government marketplace. So we need to find a way to kind of right size those restrictions. Many governments are dealing with outdated procurement timelines and boilerplate used in their contracts, which many times by the time you actually buy the AI, it's obsolete. We have many acquisition professionals in this, that are driven by what I call the pathologies, a fear of bid challenges or protests, a fear of communicating with industry for fear that they'd be accused of being biased. Inertia, they often just buy what they know rather than actually looking around and investigating the newer technologies available. There's what my colleague Steve Schooner refers to as the tyranny of low prices, where there's such a myopic focus on getting the cheapest product or service that we're not focused on all the benefits associated with paying maybe more for better quality and better value. Oftentimes, there's a focus on designing specifications that favor design over performance, which can also inhibit our purchases. There's also significant, and this is where open contracting comes into play, supply chain transparency concerns. We have foundation models with unknown data sources, hidden foreign dependencies, possible data poisoning and manipulation. And there's also increasing integrity blind spots, algorithmic collusion, deepfake certifications, increasing organizational conflicts of interest. And so as we go through this series, I would hope that we can focus on what are some of the guiding principles we can look to help us as we kind of navigate these increasing challenges. The first is I implore everyone discussing these issues to focus on principles and not just rules. We often prepare our acquisition workforce with almost a check the box mindset to focus on exactly what those rules are. We want to focus on why we're doing things, why we need to take certain actions, not just how to do them. We encourage outcome-based requirements. We want to have governments stating their mission or stating the needs and letting industry and the contractors figure out those solutions. So giving greater discretion to industry to kind of help government and work as a better partner. We need risk proportionate controls in AI acquisition. Otherwise, we're going to be stifling innovation or deterring vendors from entering our entire system. But of course, we don't want the Wild West. We need to move to more iterative contracting processes, not these kind of long-term clunkier processes that we've been using, where we can do basically contract sprints. We need to train or build the capacity in our workforce to understand triggers later during contract performance so you can pre-price them, whether it's retraining because of bias or drift or cybersecurity breaches. We need to treat AI like an intern. As we continue to lean more into automation, we need to remember that due to hallucination and other issues associated with AI, that we can't just accept everything that tells us. We need to treat it like an AI like an intern and review the work before we use it for important missions. And then finally, again, I'm going to quote my colleague Steve Skinner, but he has these really good sayings. A contract is like a marriage. Often we spend so much time and energy and resources at the front end to get to the contract award, similar to the planning of a wedding. And I mean, I don't know what everybody else's wedding was like if you're not married yet or if you're married, but I know myself spent so much time planning the wedding. And at the end, you're like, oh, I'm married. The hard part's over. No, no, no. That's when the hard part begins. That's when the work begins. And the contract is the same way. After award is where the hard work begins in any of these AI procurements where we're going to be dealing with breaches, drift, and the need to retrain. And these solutions that I'm offering you, just a few of them, don't operate in a vacuum. They depend on one fundamental change, and that's transparency. And this is where open contracting comes in. Whether we're buying, pencils or generative AI, the public needs to understand what was bought and from whom and at what price and with what guardrails. That's just a baseline. And open contracting is going to enable that oversight. So as governments race to buy AI and to use AI, the stakes obviously couldn't be higher. And so by committing to full transparency, by committing to open contracting at every stage, we can promote integrity. We can really ensure that we have the oversight and, again, that integrity that we need as technology is rapidly changing how and what government buys. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Next, I'm going to introduce Gavin. And thank you, Jessica, for joining us from Texas so early. This was very generous of you. So I have to say, Gavin Hayman is one of my favorite people in the world. The launch of this webinar series is when I went all the way around to the other side of the globe to Malaysia to a conference on anti-corruption and procurement. And many of the speakers were from the Open Contracting Partnership. And it was only by attending that conference and meeting so many top-notch people from OCP from around the world that I really understood Gavin's genius in putting together this network of people, these professionals who are doing really remarkable work in open contracting, but also more broadly in anti-corruption and procurement. So we're very, very grateful to have him and his team join us for this webinar series. Gavin is the Executive Director of the Open Contracting Partnership. Before that, he was Executive Director and Director of Campaigns of Global Witness. He oversaw the groundbreaking and award-winning investigative campaigning and advocacy work uncovering secret deals, corruption, and conflict around the world. He helped negotiate the Intergovernmental Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative that brings together oil and mining companies, home and host governments, and civil society to improve disclosure and oversight of over $1 trillion of oil and mining money. He is an expert on illicit financial flows and helped lead global efforts to end the abuse of anonymous shell companies for money laundering and financial crime, including working with British government's recent presidency of the G8 and the Open Contracting Partnership. He has a doctorate from the University of Reading and has worked with Chatham House in London and the United Nations Environmental Program on analyzing and investigating global environmental crime. And I know that based on Gavin and I spoke at the OECD at an OECD conference just earlier this month, and I know that he talked a little bit about the work that he's doing with the UK government with regards to analyzing why procurement broke down during the pandemic. And I hope we have a chance to discuss that in the brief Q&A that we have at the end of the session. After Gavin speaks, we'll have a brief Q&A. And this is a relatively brief session, so George will be wrapping up with us after that to talk about the future sessions. But if you have any questions, I'm monitoring the chat as is George, and we'll be glad to address those during the Q&A session. Gavin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, and for that super kind introduction. And welcome to Open Contracting Summit, everyone from around the world. It's just lovely to have you with us, and thank you for George Washington University for hosting this amazing series where we'll be hearing from frontline innovators working to transform country procurement in their countries and in their societies from around the world. So Chris, you gave such a nice introduction to my kind of background as a civil society investigator, looking at kind of the challenge of following the money and making sure it gets spent around the world. And inevitably that kind of background in kind of corruption hunting led me into public procurement, because it's often where perhaps things go wrong or money gets misspent. But I really have, over the last 10 years of leading Open Contracting Partnership, come to realize public procurement is so much more than that, right? It's not simply about avoiding the bad things. It's a fundamental piece of infrastructure for government itself. Government basically runs on public procurement. Public contracts deliver, as Jessica was saying, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, and everything we really care about. Is your tax dollars at work or not? A lot of government policies and procedures are fairly abstract, but public procurement touches all of our lives, and we all notice when it doesn't go wrong. And increasingly, we're really asking, just like Jessica was saying, public procurement to step up. We're asking our governments to buy things in a fundamentally different way if we want to tackle the challenge of climate change, if we want to be more socially inclusive. And we need to rethink public procurement and think differently about it. And so here's the thing. Given that, it's amazing like how little attention is spent on actually thinking about how we do public procurement and how we move it from being a risk-averse, rules-based bureaucratic chore to really rethinking it as a smart, inclusive, user-friendly digital public service. And that's really why we founded the Open Contracting Partnership, was to think different about public procurement in that way. And many of you may know, for example, the legendary Apple Think Different campaign about the Apple Mac, right? It's not the processor or the keyboard or the particular monitor. It's what you can do with the computer, right? Einstein would be using a Mac to, reimagine how the universe and gravity works and everything else in space-time. It's those kind of things. And similarly, we need to think different about public procurement. It's not just the rules, it's what it gets you that really matters, and it's what you do with it to drive better delivery for citizens and better outcomes for society from government spending. And so really that's how we think about open contracting. Our mission is to open up and transform public procurement around the world. It's a 10-year anniversary. It's why it's a particular joy to be celebrating this kind of summer of open contracting with George Washington. We started from a kind of snowy desk in Washington, D.C., and that was the grand ambition. It's the world's largest marketplace. It's one in every $3 spent by government. And we really wanted to rethink how it works, to just make government better, to make sure the citizens' money gets converted into, the goods and services they really deserve. And we kind of, over 10 years, have kind of tested and iterated, and we basically do three things. So first of all is that think different piece, which is really about rethinking public procurement as a goal-driven, citizen-centered public service. Then to get there, we need to build the alliances, both within government and outside government, to drive like strategic change. And we know there's lots of vested interest, there's lots of bureaucratic inertia. So we need to build a kind of coalition of the willing to really drive that change and make sure the gains are secure and sustainable over time. And then really the game changer is how we can co-create and collaborate on digital solutions powered by open data to get us there. And so, for the open data and digitalization piece, which we think can be a game changer, we support things like an open contracting data standard, which is about converting the kind of documents in procurement to machine-readable fields of data that allow much deeper analysis and measurement of the whole of the market of procurement across the whole cycle, from planning through to the tendering or solicitation of contracts, through to the actual award. And then super importantly, like you said, the important part of the marriage isn't the wedding, it's the working together every day, the delivery of public contracts, and that's so important. So that ability to convert the kind of transactional nature with individual companies into overall understanding of the whole shape of the marketplace is a game changer to thinking about procurement as kind of performance and how we are delivering goods and services to citizens. The data standard is the start, it's a tool, it's a means to an end, and the end is a better outcome. So really importantly, the other part of the work is really to then think about how we use that data to drive better performance. And so we provide, for example, open source libraries of indicators of efficiency and competition and fairness in procurement. Or there could be red flags to warn you when public contracts are in danger of being delivered badly or awarded badly. Are you sole sourcing too much with particular suppliers and so on? And there's a wonderful phrase in China, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. That's very much the case with public procurement. You think about the federal and state levels in the US, there's a lot of information there, a lot of transactions going on. I'm from the UK, there's about 20,000 frontline procurement, people, not always professionally trained, delivering public contracts and spending public money. So how do you get a sense of what people are doing, and not to punish them, just to be clear, just to understand the state of the marketplace and how you elevate procurement as a function, give the training and support they need to really go out and talk to businesses and source new solutions and everything else. So that's kind of open contracting. The three things we do, as I said, goal-driven reforms, building coalitions of change, and then the data and digitalization to really deliver on those. And in this wonderful series, we're going to take you on this world tour. We're going to hear about Europe and Africa and the innovations there, the Americas, like a hotbed of innovation, these kind of things, and also hearing from Asia on different time zones and amazing examples from frontline reformers who are delivering on this. A quick stock take on where we are as open contractors. I said 10 years. we reckon the strategies we've been supporting amazing innovators around the world have probably delivered about $120 billion of better spending per year and probably positively impacted about 200 million people. And we've been able to like come up with like 20 compelling examples of like change where these principles, and I think Jessica put it so well, it's not the rules, it's the principles of what you're trying to achieve and then measuring those and continuously improving of where that strategy of thinking different about public procurement as a smart digital service is really delivering results. A super quick example for you from our early days. We were, started in 2015. That was just after the Maidan revolution in Ukraine. And one of our earliest like collaborations was with then a coalition of civil society and government to rethink public procurement. And I was speaking to the minister in charge, and he said, it's really striking. We have two really visible public reforms. One is the police. The police are no longer paramilitaries who extort money from you. They'll give you directions, they'll help you out with public problems, they're there to serve you. And second was public procurement, so that we are no longer seen as the government to be awarding contracts to cronies who extort money and fail to deliver services. We're going to spend it amongst the small businesses of Ukraine, the emerging middle class, to show people what like fair and inclusive procurement looks like. And once small businesses had a much better experience through a fully digitalized system, they didn't take the old paper-based process online. They rethought the entire flow of business to make it much more user-friendly. And once small businesses bid for and won contracts, they then told all their friends. That's when real competition hugely increased. The government estimates it saved itself about $1 billion a year. Now like 80% of public contracts go to small businesses, and that's been a core part of Ukraine's resilience. We now have a big project with the Ukrainian government on thinking about the delivery of the reconstruction in similar kind of open principles, open by design, to include people, to get better outcomes, and to change the power structures around these things. So it's just more inclusive and effective, and people see the benefits, they support the reforms, and you get this kind of virtuous circle of improvements. So that's another example. We're also going to hear from places like Colombia, and a great example there of rethinking school meals, something really tangible, 700,000 children getting school meals in Bogota each day. There was a single contractor who used to charge a fortune, pay very, very poor amounts for the providers. They were able to rethink that and have a much more agile procurement model driven by data, where they would shop for small lots and assemble the meals separately. And that led to a huge increase in the quality of the meals. They were able to bust a price fixing ring around the issue as well. And now they won the national award for delivering those school meals. And they're looking at how they scale that across the country. So great examples of thinking different, data-driven strategies and getting better outcomes. So I'll stop there, but just super excited to be kicking off this series, and we'll be learning a lot together as we go around the world to hear from the front line. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gavin. I had a chance to review the project that you guys worked on in Bogota to reform how school lunches are being procured. It's really interesting from a comparative standpoint and looking across the world. So we in the United States, and we tend to focus on federal procurement, oftentimes on defense, major procurements. But this issue of how you use procurement reform to make sure that kids eat better, this is a really fundamental question. It's actually been picked up by several. For instance, our colleagues in Budapest have done a localized study of that. And it's really interesting to see how you can take these tools and not just use it to buy better IT systems or buy better weapons, but to do something just very practical, make sure kids have a decent lunch. I was very heartened to see the work that you've done in Bogota, and thank you for that. So I have a couple questions for you, Gavin, to return to the fundamental elements that we talked about in the introduction of what is it in open contracting. In open contracting has two basic principles. One is that data is accessible, and the second is the data be machine readable so that it can be used for exchange and used for analysis. What are some of the obstacles you've seen on the first point on making data accessible? What are some of the obstacles you've seen? And the macro question, the meta question for me is, does open contracting mean the end of freedom of information or open government laws, which assume episodic access to information? Does open contracting just turn all of that upside down with regards to the first point? When you presume everything is accessible all the time, does it turn our universe upside down?
So great questions. We always say open by design. So the idea is thinking very consciously about the information you need, as government or, to do your job properly, and then the information you want to share with others to get better outcomes. So we really center it around user-focused disclosure. So the Open Contracting Data Standard was a global exploration of who publishes what in procurement, and then matching those to particular what you would call use cases. So it's not just about transparency for its own sake, it's what you do with the data that's really important. So if you're a business looking for contracts, what is it you want to know, right? So of course we need to share that with businesses. If you're like a community member, and we'll hear great examples of that from different countries, wanting to understand what projects are being built in your community. So one of the great examples would be a civic activist group made up of student monitors called Reaccion in Paraguay. They're monitoring disbursement of funds to their schools. They're meant to be fixed and fixing roofs, delivering classrooms, whiteboards, those kind of things. So they want to follow the money for their own education effectively and make sure their schools have the infrastructure that makes them fit for purpose. So understanding those elements of disclosure, and you track back to what information is collected and how you share that in the most relevant and usable format. So open data formats are great. At the same time, you need to think about how you actually put that information in front of the right person at the right time for them to be able to get agency and value from that information. So it could be just sometimes people want to download huge spreadsheets and do analysis. Other times it might be they just want a notification on a coming contract for a small business on their phone. So we just say, thinking through that entire chain is a new skill to interpret procurement in that way versus rules-based compliance. And that's one of the things that we exist to help people with, and to share examples of what other people have already done that helps you go kind of further faster. So that's that piece. And then just on the machine readability, I mean, this is, as Jessica was saying, obviously AI is going to transform the world. The basic feedstock of goods and analysis is high quality information that is timely, that is relevant, that is contains the correct fields you need to understand things. So to give you a real world example of that, the UK has just had a new Procurement Act. For the first time ever, the UK is collecting information about competition at a central level on public contracts. Before, maybe you could go and look at individual procurements to understand the number of bidders, but we didn't understand that in the past. That'll give us good ideas about, are we including SMEs? If we make a contract SME friendly, do SMEs actually bid? And if they don't bid, why don't they bid? Let's talk to them and find out and understand how we can make things more friendly and more accessible. So the machine readability is just reimagining that at scale. So the idea of understanding contracts before they go wrong, rather than audit function, as you said, the reactive disclosure to find out what's happened, to actually get information and say, hold on a minute, we're sole sourcing this contract again. We've done that 3 times previously, and with the same contractor. That's probably a red flag we should look at and understand. Is it lack of capacity? Is it urgency? Is it a failure to plan ahead? And what do we do about that as procurement professionals to educate and elevate the frontline team? So just trying to think about those things and really shifting from procurement as a predominantly rules-based transaction with a particular company after the solicitation, to actually thinking about the whole shape of the marketplace and the flow of the deals and information across government, and what that means for government delivery of services.
So let me just ask you one final question, if I could, Gavin, on this point of information. So you described a very elegant approach that OCP has taken to try to sort out where data might be used. And so you said transparency not for its own sake, but figuring out how this data might be useful in society. How do you deal with the challenge that you can't always predict how this data might be used? So for example, when the federal procurement data system was put together, and it was led by a friend of mine, a guy who teaches with me, David Drapkin. When he put it together, there was no way that he and his team could have predicted that the federal procurement data system would be used very effectively by companies such as Bloomberg within 10 years, or that it would go through a front end that was developed by an NGO and then bought by the U.S. government. USA Spending is a front end that makes it possible to read the really complex data in the federal procurement data system, and it's usable, whereas the FPDS really isn't. So David and his team couldn't have predicted all the wonderful ways in which that data was going to be used once it's transparent and accessible. How do you deal with that open-ended risk, Gavin, when we really don't know all the wonderful ways the open data might be used?
Yeah, so there's always that kind of the invisible like hand of analysis and new levels of insight. It's something, one can plan for to some extent and say, yeah, we know that we share this, there will be new outcomes, new insights, new levels of analysis. It does require a certain maturity and engagement. So this is where perhaps the coalitions of change aspect comes in, and the goal-driven reforms, right? You understand what your objectives are. If you're able to say, one of the key things we want to do is do, for example, more collaboration with small businesses, just think about that, or to, better follow the money to deliver, schools in Uganda, those kind of things. We open our minds to collaborations with other actors to think about how they use the data, and we're responsive to that. I think on this call, we have some of the amazing civic monitors from Indonesia Corruption Watch who are doing exactly that. For example, and they're joining us super late, so thank you very much, team from Indonesia. But they are just in direct collaboration with the government, so they act as an infomediary in this case, precisely like you're saying Bloomberg does, to just take the government data but make it more accessible, more user-friendly. They provide a layer of analysis on top of that with their clever red flag system, and they help think about how to monitor that in communities. And in fact, on our website, there's some great blogs where they are following the money to look at overpriced goods and services and failure to deliver. And it does, therefore, we're quite right, that building an understanding of what we're all trying to achieve collectively is quite important, because a government has to, you want to give citizens a voice, you want to give companies a voice, and government also needs to have an ear to listen. So again, that elevation of procurement as a dynamic, responsive function in government versus we set the rules, thank you, good luck, and we'll enforce them, and tell you when you've done it wrong. So it's again, back to that thinking difference, that mindset shift, and that coalition building. Very last thing I'd say is it's important to have a publication policy of what you're sharing and why and what the outcomes are, and then reviewing the publication against those. So to give you an example, we're not ideological and everyone publishes everything. We have a guide on contracts confidential, thinking about what information can be confidential, when should it be confidential, when should you withhold it. So rather than lazy defaults of, oh, it's commercially confidential, we can't share that, think about it intentionally. So if you were after a contract being published that maybe had the names, it was supporting children who had mental health services, you wouldn't publish the name of the kids, right? Coke doesn't need to publish its secret formula in the government contract, for example. But basic information on the money being spent and the outcomes you're seeking probably is in the public interest. So just having a publication policy that thinks about the public interest and how you will adjudge particular cases feels important. And then there's a dynamic conversation about what that means in practice in different scenarios.
Fascinating, Gavin. Thank you. And what's hidden behind all this is your enormous leadership, your phenomenal leadership in driving all this. So thank you. So with that,
to work with just amazing team, amazing reformers in the world, and obviously I just doff my hat to all of them. They're the superstars who we'll be hearing from the rest of the series.
Thank you, Gavin. So George, I'll turn that over to you, and make sure, George, that you mentioned the next session is at 2:00 in the morning Eastern time, so people can brace themselves.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Jessica. I think this has been an excellent introduction to the series, really highlighting some of the kind of key questions and key discussion items that we'll hope to sort of really dive further into once we get into the regional sessions. So as you've heard, we've been really collecting some of the impact that we've seen across the world, and we're trying to bring some of those experts, from India, from Uganda, we've heard about Ukraine and from Chile, and they will share their insights on how they've been achieving these impacts. So over the next 2 weeks, we'll have 3 sessions, and I'll invite you, and we'll invite you to join us for this session. The next session is next Tuesday, July 22nd. As Chris said, it's for those of us in sort of this time zone, Eastern time zone. It's at 2 a.m. in the morning. for most of the others, it will be at a reasonable time, and I think it will be very much worth it, because we'll hear from the Philippines, who have just implemented a new public procurement law, and which has like a single digitization agenda at its core. So we'll hear about how they've been translating legal, the sort of like from the legal perspective into now the practical perspective, and how they're going about that. We'll hear from Thailand, which is one of the largest market in the Asia region as well, from the Director for Electronic Government, who have been implementing open contracting reforms and now are thinking about like how they're using open data better to analyze corruption risks. We'll hear from Indonesia. Gavin already highlighted their excellent work. And I like the Asia session because we have some different actors talking about open contracting as well, which is part of the concept. So we'll hear from civil society about how they've engaged with the government on opening up data. And we'll hear from a really exciting project from India, where we've worked with the state of Assam on thinking about, well, there are, we've had some torrential rains here in DC over the last couple of days. How do you manage flood risks, and what impact does that have on, where you build, what you build, and how you integrate that risk into the public procurement planning process. Then the session after that is on the 24th of July, next Thursday, and we have some excellent innovators from the Americas there. So we'll have Carlos Pimentel, the director of the Dominican Republic Public Procurement Agency, who's come into position 5 years ago now, with a real focus on like, how do I use data to improve public procurement, particularly on an anti-corruption and trust agenda. So we'll hear how he's implemented some of our red flags guidance into tracking 21 red flags indicators and improving and reducing direct awards in the process. And the kind of challenges that he has, because as Chris, you've said, you get a lot of pushback if you do that. If suddenly everyone can see and analyze all the data, you do get pushback. So we'll hear how they've been able to manage that. Similar to Christian Cespedes, who's I think in the region from Chile Compra, he's the Chief Technology Officer. He'll have some interesting insights into AI as well, as they've been testing and buying some of that experience as well. And then Nuevo León, which is a state. So we go a little bit sub-regional, and we'll hear from the state of Nuevo León on how they're rebuilding their e-procurement system now as well, with open contracting, with the open contracting data standard at its core. So this is going to be a really interesting exercise of sort of like thinking procurement again, not from sort of like a legal perspective, but from a data perspective. And what is the data that we need, and how does that influence the technology that we deliver? So that's Thursday, 24th of July. And then finally, we will hear from our amazing reformers and partners in Africa and Europe. I think some of them have been on this call today. We'll hear from Uganda, Doreen, Kiase Mulema. We'll talk about how they've been increasing access to women businesses, as well as citizen participation as well. We've also, and I think it's one of those, and then we'll hear from Rwanda, who have been localizing the development of their e-procurement systems and really built one of the strongest e-procurement systems that we've seen, that really goes from planning all the way to implementation, and using data as a way to address and increase competition as well. We'll hear from the UK. Gavin has mentioned some of the excellent work that they've been doing. And one of the other exciting areas, or like the new areas in public procurement, is really how do you buy more environmentally friendly? How do you buy more green? So we'll hear from Lithuania, who has made sure that over just a couple of years, 2-3 years, they've gone from 5% of public procurement processes considering environmental criteria to nearly 100%. The 5% that don't do that, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but he'll be able to talk and share some of their thinking around how they've used data to really improve that and integrate environmental criteria as part of their procurement processes, and what the next frontier is in terms of social procurement as well. And then, as Chris highlighted, we'll have a subsection that really looks into one of the largest kind of like rule maker and data host, which is the European Union. And we'll hear from the head of TED and New Procurement Unit about their thinking about the procurement data space, the new EU directives that are currently in development. So this is promising to be a really exciting session, particularly because it balances out different kinds of experiences as well. So that is going to be on Tuesday, July 29. And if you haven't registered for the full series yet, think about sort of like where you can put your clock and listen into like a little midnight podcast for some of us. For others, I think they will really enjoy the Asia session as well. So make sure to join, and you can use this QR code to register. And we look forward to seeing you over the next 2 weeks, and we'll be sharing this introductory session and additional materials as part of our part of the website and as part of the series as well. So look out for more information on that, and we look forward to seeing you over the next 2 weeks. Thank you very much, and back to Chris.
Thanks very much, George. So besides recordings of the series through the open contract, we'll be making available through the Open Contracting Partnership website. We'll also be making background resources available. Anisley and George have already posted a number of resources. And if you have resources that you'd like us to post on open contracting, please feel free to send it to us. And my email address is cukins@law.gwu.edu, easy to find on the web. And we'll be happy to post those resources, because an important goal of these webinar series is to serve as a research resource for students and for researchers around the world. So to close out, George, we had one question that I wonder if Gavin and Jessica could address, which was a question that was from Diogo Henriquez. Is it in the past there was a tacit knowledge saying that secrecy is the soul of business? How are open data and open contracting changing that paradigm locally and globally? Jessica, do you want to address that first?
Sure. And I'm going to let Gavin speak to, I know he already started typing about I'd say secrecy is the soul of rent seeking, which totally, I agree. I would also just simply add to that, so is impunity, because one of the things I think recent history has taught us that even with great transparency, if there's impunity, it almost eliminates the need for the transparency. It doesn't eliminate it, but I think those two go hand in hand. And obviously, you can't address rent-seeking, corruption, integrity concerns without transparency, and we need that insight into how things are happening so that we could actually enact change and really promote integrity throughout public procurement systems. But we also need tools and a means to address the issues that we discover. And when we have impunity, there's a feeling of hopelessness. And as history has taught us, when citizens feel hopeless about impunity, it can lead to extremism, terrorism, all sorts of instability globally. So I think transparency is essential, but we also need that other piece to that, and that's to how to address and try to prevent and deal with impunity as well.
Thank you, Jessica. Gavin, last word.
Yeah, and I put a bit more in the chat and the resource there, just sort of, I'd say, yeah, secrecy is about maybe rent-seeking extraction of rents from government and so on. But yeah, like have maybe a more dynamic understanding of business as, like something that's much more transformational, is add extraordinary value to people and deliver extraordinary value, and then people will be repeat customers. And just to give a real world practical procurement example, one of the ones we'll touch on the series, Mexico City. So Mexico City for the first time has a big bike share EcoBC scheme, and they wanted to extend it to many more regions, to the poorest parts of town. And rather than previously, it would be who you knew in the city administration, whether you got a heads up about the contract. They published their first ever kind of pre-market engagement to actually say, you know what, let's talk to the marketplace about how we can do this and make the bike scheme better. And they found there were companies with the technology solutions, companies with the logistics experience, and then citizens to engage about where to put the bike docks that are most useful to them, like outside stations rather than the middle of nowhere, those kind of things. And they were able to effectively by doing that, build consortia of businesses bringing their own unique skills to the situation, and they're able to double the reach of the bike share for the same price. So effectively kind of, like half the cost of delivery. And they've got happy bike users. The bikes are better. They have a lower crossbar so that women can use them more effectively. There's a lovely infographic we put together there, like put in the chat. And that's an example of rethinking procurement to be more open, to engage the marketplace, to talk about solutions, and then kind of implement them is really powerful. And that matters because you're talking about, the millions, 10 plus million citizens of Mexico City having a kind of access to better mobility solutions in a city that is absolutely gridlocked. So it's really powerful. And it turns out it's good for inclusion and for citizens as well. So I think open is fundamentally better. That issue of how we get there, engaging kind of political economy to drive radical change is what's so fascinating. One of the things we'll be talking about in the series. But great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gavin. And I think with this, we want to close this prelude. I'm hoping we'll have exciting conversations over the next 2 weeks. And I think one of the things that you'll probably and hopefully have gotten from this introduction is that, we often say procurement is kind of a bit boring, but that's only because for the longest time it's been seen as a bureaucratic exercise. But actually, once you start thinking about the impacts and the results and how we are actually, the data that we can use to work with it, it's got really exciting. And hopefully we can convey that enthusiasm that we have for procurement. And we'll see you next week. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.